119, gave the British military commander the authority to demolish and seal and confiscate houses of persons and their families who have committed or attempted to commit offenses. Israel today continues to punitively seal and demolish houses of Palestinians with the approval of the Israeli High Court of Justice. Israel's collective punishment policies targeting the Palestinian people include, but are not, this is not exhaustive, but they include house demolition, house sealing, economic and psychological warfare against the families of alleged attackers. They also include the withholding of bodies of deceased Palestinians, the confiscation of money from families of alleged attackers, civil lawsuit targeting families of alleged attackers. All those target people who have not committed any offense personally. These policies also include closure of entire neighborhoods in reprisals to an alleged attack. To comprise collective punishment, these measures must be taken in response to an alleged attack. If not, they are referred to as attacks on civilians. For decades, Israel, the occupying power, resorted to collective punishment to suppress Palestinian resistance to its occupation. Moreover, over the years, Israel has strategically fragmented the Palestinian people into four main categories, four separate geographic, legal, and political domains. They comprise Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinian residents of Jerusalem, Palestinians living in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian refugees and exiles living outside mandatory Palestine. Palestinians from the different areas are unable to meet, group, live together, and exercise any collective rights, including and in particular the right to self-determination. In the UN ESCWA report issued in 2017, the authors determined that Israel has institutionalized a regime of racial discrimination and oppression over the Palestinian people, including through its strategic fragmentation of the Palestinian people, which these policies of racial domination and oppression amount to apartheid. The crime of apartheid is defined by the 2002 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court as inhumane acts committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over another racial group or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. In order to maintain specifically the apartheid regime, Israel has resorted to policies and practices which include arbitrary detention, torture, ill treatment, as well as collective punishment. Israeli collective punishment policies are implemented under the guise of deterrence, but the intention is domination and is oppression. Israel consistently uses the security rationale to escalate its punitive policies against the Palestinian people with the aim to punish, oppress, and subjugate the Palestinians. For example, something not many people know about, Israel withholds the bodies of Palestinians killed during alleged attacks as a form of collective punishment against their families. In 2020, 21 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli occupying forces, which withheld the bodies of 12 of these Palestinians. 65 bodies of Palestinians killed by Israel continue to be withheld today. In 2016, the Israeli parliament adopted an amendment to the Israeli counter-terrorism law, which grants the Israeli police the authority to withhold bodies of deceased Palestinians. In many cases, bodies have been conditionally returned to families for burial, but where Israel puts a very difficult situation for these families to fight the system and fight in courts following the loss of a loved one. These conditions set by the Israeli authorities for the release of the body of a deceased Palestinian often include an immediate burial for Jerusalem, thus bearing an autopsy. Also, the authorities impose burial at night with a limited number of people approved to attend the ceremony, 10, 15 people. The UN General Assembly declared in 2016 that in addition to amounting to collective punishment, the withholding of bodies is inconsistent with Israel's obligation as an occupying power. Professor Shane Darcy, who has studied the illegality of collective punishment, wrote in an article in 2010, invading armies and occupying powers have used collective punishment in the hope of curbing attacks and ensuring obedience, although the stated aim of deterrence at times serves as a mere cloak for oppression and subjugation. This approach really reflects Israel's policies, which target the Palestinian people.
Thank you, Nada, for an exhaustive overview of what collective punishment is and the different methods used by Israel as part of its larger strategy of apartheid. And the report submitted by Professor Michael Lynk was published and has more details on each method of collective punishment. Issam, Younis, I'm gonna you're based in Gaza now. You've been based in Gaza for a long time, working on the human rights situation there. What have been the historical and current manifestations of collective punishment in the Gaza Strip, and what has been the impact on Palestinians there?
Thank you so much. I mean, let me first of all thank you all for the invitation, and others who join us to listen to us and share us some of the ideas. Thank you so much for all of this. Well, I'm in Gaza, actually, as you said, and I think we have to put the collective punishment and the different policies, measures in a context. And when one should return back a little bit to history. You know, Gaza before 1967 was under the Egyptian administration. West Bank was part of the Jordanian kingdom. 1967 came 2 decades after the Nakba of 1948, which was the largest, maybe at that time, the largest ethnic cleansing campaign that took place. So 2 decades after Nakba, Israel occupied the rest of the territories and parts of the Arab territories, Sinai and the Golan Heights. The first military order that was issued by the Southern military commander declared Gaza a closed military zone, which means that the rule is the closure and the easing is the lifting it sometimes all the years of occupation. So the blockade, the closure, restrictions is inherent in the doctrine, in the military doctrine of the Israeli army. So those who find themselves coincidentally at that day outside Gaza for the sake of education, family visits or whatever, lost their right to return back to Gaza. And we have another category, another group, which has been identified by the Oslo Accords to be not refugees, but displaced. So we have refugees and we have displaced. And since that time, this order have been used for all actions that have been taken. So in the 70s, early 70s, late 60s, the commander gave Gazans a general burden, a general permit, based on my authorities as a commander and based on the military order number 1. I give the Gaza residents a general permit where people could go outside Gaza. When the Israelis opened the door for the young people, which is a security problem, how to solve it, then the easiest way was to push them to sell their labor force in the Israeli labor market, and the Israeli economy was a construction economy. So there was a need for that labor, but in fact, it's pure security way of addressing the problem. Why I'm saying this? Because it should be put in a context. This was the case until 1988, during the first Intifada, when the commander deleted or abolished that burden, that permit, the general permit, and ordered Gazans to have 3 documents in case they want to leave Gaza, and they should apply for the military governorate to get a permit, and then we should have the ID card as well as what's so-called a magnetic card. So 3 documents to leave Gaza. And the whole idea of the blockade now is different in many ways. But back to the history, suddenly Gazans and West Bankers together, they were open to each other, and both of them are open to their brothers inside Israel. And it was a good and important gathering somehow, where Palestinians have to refix their identity 2 decades after Nakba. Myself, for example, I studied at Bir Zayt, from Gaza, studied at Bir Zayt near Ramallah. And, people, just families have to go from here and there. And I think with Oslo, the Israelis has decided to return the issues back to the eve of the 5th of June of 1967. So to kill any potential for any unity between the territories. And I believe this is the whole rationale. One also could go back a little bit without invoking figures. I mean, we could easily invoke figures. The report of the Mr. Lynk is full of figures when it comes to how collapsing the different services, which we might speak about. But just to put it in its real context and the whole rationale behind the tightening the blockade of Gaza. In 2005, Israel unilaterally decided to disengage from Gaza. So they left it from the door and they came back from the windows, from the heart of the cities, and redeployed alongside the borders and parameters of Gaza, the sky, and the airspace, and the sea of Gaza. So by doing so, the whole idea was to kill any unity and to cut the way in front of what was the international community is asking for, is pushing for, which is a two-state solution. At that time, Sharon was the premier, and he took this initiative. And the whole idea also was to kill any potential in this for unity, but also to push Gaza towards the south, towards Egypt, to be dependent. And then they declared Gaza a hostile entity, and since that time until the year 2007, when Hamas won the majority in the PLC, in the Palestinian Legislative Council, which is also significant here, because elections, when they took place, they were backed by the international community, on top of them of the United States, and all of them want Hamas to run and to join elections. And then we have a democratic process. Hamas got the majority, so everyone wants the democracy, but no one was ready to swallow the outcome. And then they have decided to go for measures against Gaza, which were tightened when Hamas later on took over Gaza. So again, those measures was intended to crack down Hamas. However, the whole community is the victim of this quite bad policy. If you compare it with smart weapon, for example, the smart weapon, the cruise missile, might hit the target and only the target. Here, the collective punishment has a very, very severe dynamics and consequences on protected civilians, on the services that already dire in a very dire situation. And the number of people have been dramatically increased. According to the report of Mr. Lynk, he would refer to the fact that 25% of the people has been increased since the year 2012 until the year 2017. So imagine, the number has been that much increased, while the services and the infrastructure have been dramatically deteriorated. So the whole, again, I think the Israelis, by imposing those collective punishments, which could amount to war crimes, the Statute of Rome of the ICC has not identified collective punishment as part of the categories, what's meant by war crimes, but the other tribunals, the Sierra Leone and Rwanda, have considered collective punishment as part of war crimes, and easily one could go for that. So on the one hand, it was intentional to kill the unity of the territories. And by the way, Oslo, if there is any good thing with Oslo has identified the territories to be one territorial unity and its integrity to be preserved, yeah, without even identifying the territory of being occupied. But at least the unity has been highlighted. However, since 1993 until today, we have witnessed this gradual separation between West Bank and Gaza Strip, and it was very direct by the Israeli army, and they have moved, which is we are witnessing now, this historic settlement of the main issues of the conflict, moving the Palestinians or transferring the Palestinians from being a nation to communities.
Yeah.
A nation called Palestinian people, a Palestinian nation, to community, the community of Gaza that's over much burdened with its problems, electricity, basics, and in Jerusalem, there are no problems, taxes, and discriminatory laws and license to build in Northwest Bank compared with the south of the West Bank, and no need to talk about Palestinians in the Badawi camps in Lebanon or Yarmouk in Syria. So they have made this fragmentation very intentional and very, very clear way. So that I think part of this historic settlement of the issues, Jerusalem moving the embassy of the American embassy to the heart of the city. That's,
I think, Issam? Yeah, I think Issam might have lost his internet connection due to some electricity and power connection problems in Gaza. But thank you so much, Issam. He focused on the manifestations of collective punishment in the Gaza Strip and put the Israel's strategy of collective punishment within the larger, a larger historical framework. And it's all within Israel's strategy of managing the conflict rather than solving it, and managing the Palestinian, the so-called Palestinian problem. And so collective punishment in a way is a tool to depoliticize Palestinians and ensure that they are dominated and managed by Israeli occupation policies. And that's why I think it's very important when Issam mentioned the permit system, which emerged in the late 1980s in the Gaza Strip, and which is now a mechanism of exclusion and control. And if anyone threatens politically Israel, then the permit would be withheld, and you have like this concept of also collective punishment. We're going to turn now to collective punishment in the West Bank. We don't believe in Issam talked about Israeli policies to fragment Palestinians, but we are cognizant that Israeli policies in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip may differ. So Nada, what are the manifestations of collective punishment in the West Bank, including Jerusalem, and what has been the impact of these policies on Palestinians there?
Yeah. I will focus, I will talk about the manifestations of collective punishment in the West Bank and focus a little bit on Jerusalem, because I think it's an interesting case study to understand the wider policy. In December 2018, the Israeli Knesset passed a bill in the preliminary reading. The bill would allow the forcible transfer of families of alleged Palestinian attackers from their hometowns to other areas of the West Bank. Netanyahu at the time expressed support for the bill, and he declared, "Expulsion of terrorists is an effective tool. To me, the benefit exceeds the damage. Jurists say it's against the law, given how it's defined, and it will surely be a legal challenge, but I have no doubt of its effectiveness." This gives us a little bit of perception of how the Israeli governments have seen collective punishment as a tool to be used against the Palestinians. While Israeli collective punishment targets all the Palestinians, the Israeli authorities have intensified these measures against the families and extended families of alleged attackers in the West Bank, and specifically I will take the case of Jerusalem as an example, and especially since 2015, with the clear objective to further forcibly transfer Palestinians from the city and set new laws and policies allowing for the forcible transfer of families of alleged attackers. Following Ghassan Abu Jamal's alleged attack in November 2014 in Jerusalem, in which he was killed by the Israeli forces, the Israeli Ministry of Interior Ministry of Interior, the Israeli Ministry of Interior, revoked his wife's family unification permit, allowing her to live with her children in Jerusalem. That was exactly following the alleged attack. When she was arrested, they announced to her that her right to live in the city with her children was revoked. The National Insurance Institute revoked the health insurance of the 3 children of this couple, two of whom suffered medical complications and needed treatment. So as collective punishment and targeting these children, the 3 children did not have the right to national insurance, which allows them to have to go to the hospital and go see doctors, etc. The Israeli army demolished the home in 2015 by putting explosive, which affected all the homes around the house of Ghassan and Nadia Abu Jamal. Nadia was arrested following that and forcibly transferred outside Jerusalem in 2017. The case of collective punishment against Nadia and her family clearly demonstrates Israel's expansion of policies that punish Palestinian individuals for offenses they did not personally commit. Since 1967, Israeli occupying forces have demolished over 2,000 houses across the OPT on punitive grounds. Between January and June 2020, Israel demolished 4 Palestinian homes on punitive grounds, resulting in the displacement of 19 people, including 3 children. 2 of these demolitions occurred following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in Palestine. Article 33 of the 4th Geneva Convention clearly states that no protected person may be punished for an offense he or she has not personally committed. Reprisals against protected persons and their property are prohibited. While Israel uses the security rhetoric to justify its inhumane illegal policies, the UN Human Rights Committee has clearly stated that the prohibition against collective punishment is non-derogable, even in states of emergency. Israel consistently uses the security rationale to escalate its punitive policies against the Palestinian people, with the aim, as we said, to punish, oppress, subjugate, but also, what I want to show is to also forcibly transfer Palestinians within its wider goal of demographic manipulation. The previous Israeli Minister of Interior, Aryeh Deri, declared in January 2017, "From now on, anyone who plots, plans, or considers carrying out an attack will know that his family will pay a heavy price for his deeds." He warned, consequences will be harsh and far-reaching. And this statement came following the alleged attack by Fadi Kumbar in January 2017, in which also he was killed by the Israeli forces. Israeli army directly, punitively, very few months later, 2 months after the alleged attack, punitively sealed the home of the family in which his wife and children lived. The Ministry of Interior revoked the permanent residency status, which allows Palestinians to live in Jerusalem, of Fadi's 61-year-old mother. The Ministry of Interior also revoked the family unification permits of 11 extended family members, including, for example, the residency permit, family unification residency permit, that allows the husband of the daughter of Fadi Kumbar's half-sister. So someone from a very extended family had their residency to live in Jerusalem through family unification revoked. These cases still await court decision, but in the meantime, these individuals are denied today access to basic rights because they do not have papers to work or to receive healthcare. Israel uses security and deterrence to implement these practices and to adopt laws aiming at escalating the forcible transfer of Palestinians from Jerusalem and elsewhere. These cases have established precedents paving the way for laws. The case of Nadia, also the case of Manua Kumbar and her family, that allow such practices to be used in a widespread manner. Between 2016 and 2017, Israeli lawmakers introduced at least 4 bills to give legal basis for revocation of residency permits of both persons who allegedly committed attacks and their extended family. The Ministry of Interior, in the bill, the proposed language for the bill, said in the draft of the bill, the law would give the Minister of Interior the prerogative to cancel a visa or a permanent residency of family members of a person who commits a terrorist act or has contributed to committing that act through knowledge, help, encouragement, and support before, during, or after committing the terrorist act. This shows how these criterion that they are trying to set are very vague, and Israel can easily today revoke already residencies of Palestinians, but they would like to extend it to be able to easily revoke the residencies of families on the basis of deterrence. Bills integrating population transfer are continuously introduced to the Knesset. On the 11th of May 2020, member of Knesset, including Ayelet Shaked, the previous Minister of Justice, introduced a bill giving the Israeli Minister of the Interior the authority to expel the family members, I cite, of a terrorist outside the state of Israel. And it said, if the person knew in advance of the plan to commit an act of terrorism, expressed support or sympathy for the act of terrorism, or published praise, sympathy, or encouragement for the act of terrorism, that they would be expelled, according to the bill, outside of the state of Israel. These practices and laws are in line with Israel's wider strategy to change the demography of the city of Jerusalem through the transfer of Palestinians, through pre-established laws that have been there since '67 for East Jerusalem, and regulations that include the revocation of residency, the banning of family unification, which would allow Palestinians from outside of Jerusalem to live in Jerusalem, discriminatory zoning and planning, which doesn't allow us to build in Jerusalem, and house demolitions based on the fact that we do not receive permits and Palestinians build without the permit and have their homes demolished. I think in conclusion, should I conclude?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Just in conclusion, Israel uses collective punishment as a means to suppress Palestinian resistance and maintain its apartheid regime of institutionalized racial discrimination and oppression. Collective punishment, what we need to remember, is essentially unjust. It targets people who have not committed any wrongdoing. Collective punishment targets also the dignity of the Palestinian people. And the intention through collective punishment is to dominate, subjugate, but also to push Palestinian out of the city, for example, in this case, from Jerusalem.
Thank you so much, Nada, for giving us an overview of Israeli measures of collective punishment, focusing specifically on Jerusalem, and it's all within, as you said, Israel's larger strategy and policy of Judaizing Jerusalem, that is ensuring Israeli Jewish political, economic, and demographic control over Jerusalem. I just want to remind the audience that you can ask your questions. There's a tab at the bottom of the screen called Ask a Question. So please let us know if you have any questions. In 5 minutes, I will be asking the questions to both Nada and Issam. And Issam, like I have this, my last question to you. This is a broad topic, so I'm just trying to focus on a couple of questions. What do you think should be done by Palestinians and the international community to counter Israeli measures of collective punishment? And if you can talk based on your experience living in Gaza, on specifically on actions that have to be taken, that would be great.
Well, I think the key word when it comes to the occupied territory, especially Gaza, is accountability. As long as Israel, as an occupying power, is not accountable to any, I think the worst is yet to come. Collective punishments, in addition to 3 wars in less than 6 years over a very tense and populated area, Gaza, where all crimes have been taken, destroying and bombarding a multi-story building, towers on top of those who are living there, attacking infrastructure, sewage systems, and sometimes, and those, imagine the people who were ordered to flee where they're living their zones alongside the eastern part of Gaza Strip, who were ordered by the army to evacuate. They were the only, I mean, there is no safe haven in Gaza. So the people in 2014, they just ran to trying to find some sort of protection by the blue flag. So they moved to the UNRWA schools here in Gaza. However, they were bombarded and shot while they were together with the blue flag. So this is the main issue here. Accountability is a must, and I cannot imagine a situation like Gaza will continue on without making those who perpetrated those war crimes, as was defined in Goldstone report in 2009, and then the other two reports of Commission of Inquiry of the Human Rights Council. The recent one was in last year, and then the different reports of the special rapporteurs on the occupied territories. But back a little bit to Gaza, my point was, and sorry for the disconnection because we don't have electricity, by the way, I mean, for the last 10 hours, due to the complete denial and banning of fuel to enter Gaza. The only power plant in Gaza, which has already been in severe problem. We have a deficit of energy before the new decision by Israel to completely deny the access of fuel. We have 64% deficit of electricity. However, now it became even worse. So we have 3 to 4 fives of supply. So we have to cope with that. That's why I'm sorry for the disconnections if it happens again. But this is the situation here. Well, I'll just give you an example from a personal story, my personal story. Today is the 20th of August. It's the day where my father, his wife, and my niece were killed in 2014 by the Israelis when they bombarded a next door house, a neighbor's house, and suddenly at the mid of the night, they were he was 79 years old in his bed. So they were killed and others were injured, and my family's house was destroyed to great extent. But this would show how things are here. So if they are not accountable, it will continue to commit such crimes. Civilians are protected, and no one could claim that I mean, imagine with all the high tech that the Israelis have, they could not identify between an old man and a niece who is 4 years old, and between a combatant. Gaza, all of the Gaza is again a very populated areas. And also I was elected as a Commissioner General 3 years ago, and since this day I could not have access to my office in Ramallah to perform my duties as Commissioner General of the Palestinian Independent Commission for Human Rights, which is the national institution, the Human Rights National Institution, which the main work of the commission is the Palestinian internal human rights agenda. However, still denied. And again, I'm a cancer survivor. I used to go to receive treatment outside Gaza because Gaza doesn't have at all any radiotherapy system in Gaza. Most of the serious injuries and serious surgeries should be transferred to outside Gaza, either to Jerusalem or to the West Bank, or outside Gaza to other Jordan or Egypt. So I could receive treatment in Augusta, Victoria in 2006. So since the year 2017, I'm not allowed to go to pursue my treatment. I need to have checkups between here and then. I mean, every year or every 6 months. Since that time, I was denied. This is just an example. So imagine how is the restrictions on the movements. How the denial of permits for patients could go from 40 to 60%. Sometimes complete denial, sometimes a very, very slow process. And when it comes to cancer patients, the time is being counted by days. not by months, and they should receive immediately treatments. And in some cases that we receive, you could have a child who is 1 year old. He got a permit to treatment. The cancer patient got the permit, while his mother could deny a permit. So the only way to have is his grandfather or grandmother could accompany him. And imagine someone who's an old in his 70s or 60s, he or she needs someone to take care of them, not to take care of a child 10 years old or 5 years old. So this is just a very, very small example. I mean, now the Sea of Gaza is completely 0 nautical miles, while the Oslo agreements have agreed on some 12 nautical miles that Palestinians can use freely. Now it's 0 nautical mile. Addition to use of the land, and collective punishment is being imposed in every single aspect of the life. It's too much to cope with it as a society. And back again, they want to make life very tough and very difficult. And I agree with Nada. And the problem with the blockade is it reduces itself very, very badly, and it's too much burden on the people. And they are creating the infrastructure for the pushing of the people voluntarily to leave Gaza. And I think this is one of the main issues of the blockade. But back again, how they impose their policies, the collective punishment. Sometimes they use very direct measures. Sometimes they use this very notorious policy of biopolitics. They calculate the calories of Gazans, how many calories they need. So they allow the minimum that keeps the nose above the water. So imagine if they for example, fuel. Gaza needs 360,000 liters of fuel only for example, hospitals, sewage system. But cars, private cars, it's not humanitarian, it's not essential, and other services. So services in this case, they are collapsing before the blockade. And now imagine no single investment was used in any of those services or infrastructures. So the situation now is collapsing, and now people are fighting the corona and this pandemic. And I don't know how if it's spread in Gaza, then I think Gaza will collapse definitely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Issam, for this also exhaustive overview again of the manifestations of collective punishment in Gaza, because after all, the reality in the Gaza Strip, it's well engineered, it's well articulated and engineered by Israel, and produces both physical death and political death within Israel's larger settler, colonial, or apartheid policies, depending on what framework we think works best. I'm still waiting for more questions from the audience. I just have a quick question to Nada, given your advocacy work in Geneva. So Nada, the report was published a month ago, and many people, I think, were asking, so now what? What do we do with this report? Many reports were published before, which are very important, coming from the UN Special Rapporteur, but now what? And how has Israel responded to the publication of the report? If you can give us a quick answer to this.
Yes, sure. So the report was presented in July during the 44th Human Rights Council session in Geneva. In general, when a country specific is discussed, the country has the right to reply or to have the floor for 5 minutes, but Israel was not present in the room. So there was no official response during the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur. But many countries did condemn these policies during the interactive dialogue, and we had joint statements by many states condemning these measures. Just to say that what we usually hear, we have previous UN Secretary General, the High Commissioner, the ICRC, treaty bodies, they all have called on Israel to put an end to its illegal collective punishment policies. And in his report, also Michael Lynk called on Israel to end all measures amounting to collective punishment, including the closure of Gaza or restrictions on freedom of movement across the occupied Palestinian territory, the punitive demolitions of homes, the punitive residency revocations, the cutting of benefits, the punitive closure of towns, and all delays in returning bodies for burial. However, the problem is not in the statements, the problem is in the actions. The international community, the opposition it had to Israeli policies, including to Israel's use of collective punishment, it has rarely risen above the level of verbal condemnation. And this is really our problem, because the statements, as Issam said, we have fact-finding missions, we have commissions of inquiry, we have into the different violations. And today, we have this report by Professor Michael Lynk, who studied very in detail the policies on collective punishment. However, we do not have action because there is no political will to act. And I believe this is where we should be starting with also what was mentioned by Issam on accountability. If Israel enjoys impunity, we will not be able to put an end to any of these policies.
Thank you, Nada. I think, as you very clearly mentioned, the lack of political will and the focus on verbal condemnations has led to the disenfranchisement of Palestinians and their sense of abandonment from the international community, and the feeling that the international community has been paying lip service to Palestinians, but with limited action on the ground. Issam, very quickly, there's a question from Megan asking on how has COVID-19 impacted Israel's collective punishment tactics? Have they increased under the guise of the pandemic?
I think Gaza is in a very, very unique situation. I mean, sometimes the blockade would have, we don't have an airport, we don't have access. So it's sort of a G2 closed area. And those who come through the crossings, I mean, who come rarely through Eretz checkpoint north of Gaza, or the south of Gaza through Rafah crossing, would be kept in the quarantine for 21 days. So the pandemic did not spread in Gaza. However, the infrastructure is almost collapsing, and there's access of medication in some, between time and time. In the stock, they don't have the enough quantities to cope with these numbers. That's why I said they keep the nose above the water, just to keep it above the water. So if it's being spread, I don't think Gaza can cope with this. So far, it's under control. There is proactive measures, and I think through WHO and ICRC, they could allow some shipments of medicines that are needed, but still, due to the severe restrictions on the movement of the different items, goods, and through the crossings, I think it's really very, very, very complicated and very difficult, and I don't see Gaza can cope with this. Governments who have ports and airports and open borders, they have problems to cope with the pandemic. So imagine such a very populated area, 2 million people in a geography of 360 square kilometers, one of the most densely populated area. Globally speaking, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. This is one thing, but I mean, if you allow me just to add just one more sentence on what Nada said. I think all the time it was blaming the victim. Whom to be blamed are Palestinians. Their homes to be destroyed. Collective punishment is I mean, this superiority of being ethically pure, the purity of the Israeli army is something that is being proven to be a complete lie, where children, populated areas have been attacked, and I think the ball is now in the courtyard of international community. If they continue dealing with this part of the world as it is, as the case is, I think again the worst definitely is coming, not only here but also in the region. And we believe that we are part of the civilized nations. We accept what they have already accepted in settling down such disputes. The ICC, it's international, civilized nations made, and we believe it's the last resort where Palestinians could go for to just seek justice. It's only justice, and justice is not a revenge. I lost my family, part of my family, but I'm very, very more than ever that committed to the fact that justice never is revenge and will never be revenge. Justice is respect for human beings, their dignity and rules of international law. And the ICC is a new platform that is there, civilized nations have created, and we believe that it's good for the Palestinians to seek justice, regardless who is the perpetrator, regardless who is the victim. And again, it's the only way to show that justice is intentionally denied here. And can we leave protected civilians for the Israelis to decide on their fate without any sort of protection? Can this be accepted? Imagine if your home was destroyed in 2009, and when you rebuild it, the Israelis have redestroyed it in 2012. And when you rebuild it again, a family member and the home to be redestroyed in 2014. It's too much. What we are seeking is international law. And I think they have to stop this lip service and this way of approaching. The whole engagement with this part of the world should be changed, and should be changed to be on the basis of civilized rules, civilized, mechanisms that are there. We are not exceptional in this. We are part of the civilized nations, and we accept what they believe is the proper tools and mechanisms to settle down such issues. The ICC, the minute we decided to go to the ICC as NGOs, the next day smear campaigns were organized against us. And we have to be affiliated with terrorism or anti-Semitism or whatever. This would not be swallowed. I mean, as long as accountability is absent, denied, we'll keep on. We should highlight this. Accountability is a must, and accountability is the key word in the occupied terrorism. We cannot tolerate those collective punishments against civilians. And international community, no one could deny that he or she did not know what's going on here. They know it's one of the well-informed cases, globally speaking.
Thank you. Issam, you actually partially responded to a question we had on the by David on the on third-party complicity from the international community in Israel's collective punishment. Nada, there's a question, I don't know if you have the answer to it, but can you discuss collective punishment and accountability under the ICC? There's a question from Edith on that.
Yes, I think part of the answer Issam gave when he said that collective punishment was not set as a war crime under the Rome Statute of the ICC. So as collective punishment, there is no case that can be made saying Israel is guilty of collective punishment. But, and that's where I think it's very interesting when we talk about the implications on the rights of Palestinians of collective punishment, whether it's destruction of property, whether it's forcible transfer, or other basic violations to the basic rights of the Palestinians. These are violations that can be and should be tried by the ICC. And so, in my opinion, collective punishment should not be only tried as the different symptoms or the different violations that come following the imposition of collective punishment, but it should be tried as with the intention of subjugating and oppressing people, which we do not have when we try a person, a perpetrator, based on forcible transfer, because forcible transfer does not have the same weight on the people. When you talk about collective punishment, you're talking about the dignity of the person. You're talking about very harsh policies against people who have done where there is no wrongdoing. So I think collective punishment, we should call for it to be included as a war crime. And we should lobby for that and continue to lobby for that, because there is one aspect of it which is lost. And that is very important, the aspect where this is to put an end, to suppress any opposition to the occupation that is also with the intention of dominating and oppressing people.
Thank you so much, Nada. This also partially answers Laura's question on whether the report on collective punishment will be used in the ICC investigation. I think we lost Nada. Nada is back. This is like the challenges of doing things virtually. There's a question that I would like to ask you, Issam. So it's actually from Yazid Zahda, and he has two criticisms of criticisms of the report. So he's saying, I'm quoting him, the rapporteur overlooked the collective punishment towards the Gaza Strip by the Palestinian Authority, whether by cutting off salaries of people and stopping paying utility bills. This is one setback in the report, I'm quoting. Another is the stance of Hamas when it comes to easing its grip on the Gazans who are suffering from the repercussions of the split between the two rival factories. What do you think of these two remarks?
Well, 2-3 things would characterize Gaza before we address these two questions. First, Gaza is an unpredictable situation. Very difficult to plan for 2 hours. So imagine you have to deal with many things that take place, which due to the Israeli policy, due to the blockade, due to the collective punishment, it's mission impossible to organize anything. Second, it's very fragile situation because the history of Gaza is the history of dependency on aid. 75% of Gazans are refugees, dependent on UNRWA and its services, and now due to the regime of collective punishment, Gaza is in fact 85% of Gaza families are dependent on humanitarian aid provided by different agencies, and it's equating. And third, those who are responsible for the good and the bad are many. We have Israel as an occupied power. Gaza is occupied territory before Oslo and after Oslo, before the unilateral disengagement and after that, and definitely before the taking over of Gaza by Hamas and after that. So Gaza is an occupied territory, part of the occupied territories. Now the report, by referring to Hamas or the PA, I think it's beyond the mandate of the special rapporteur. The mandate, when it was created in 1994, 1995, until this day, it was mainly on the Israeli human rights practices against the Palestinians. But the PA and Hamas is also part, due to the split that's there, it has added more for the already bad situation with the different measures and with the way of, which is almost tribal mentality, the action and the reaction between here and there. And finally, people have paid a quite high price out of all of this. So definitely measures that were taken here and there are not at all acceptable and should be stopped. And we all believe that the unity of the Palestinians is a must. And I cannot imagine a nation under occupation is being split the way that we have seen. And I believe time is a very, very serious issue. It's a sword on the necks of the Palestinians, where facts are being created and sometimes irreversible. And we have to end this way of dealing with matters. It's not at all acceptable. It's sort of a childish game. I mean, it has its dynamics. But as a report, I think the Mr. Lynk, I believe, should not refer to those issues. Doesn't mean we do that work. We monitor the human rights violations by de facto authorities here in Gaza and in Ramallah. But as I'm talking about, a mandate of the special rapporteur was mainly on Israeli practices against in the occupied territories.
Thank you, Issam. We actually have 9 more questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time. So I'm gonna again thank you, Nada and Issam, for your informative and insightful presentations, and thank you also to Professor Michael Lynk for the report that he wrote, and thank you to all the civil society organizations and every single person who helped in giving the needed information to write a solid report on the issue of collective punishment in the occupied Palestinian territories. Of course, there are many more questions we could have discussed. But we certainly talked about the historical and legal context within which the concept of collective punishment emerged, and both Nada and Issam discussed the different methods used by Israel in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including Jerusalem, as part of its strategy of collective punishment. Issam focused specifically on Israel's movement restriction policies, including the blockade, and put them within a larger historical framework. Nada focused more on the case of Jerusalem and provided us with painful but powerful stories of specific individuals in Jerusalem and how they were affected by Israel's collective punishment policies, which I think should be read within Israel's larger strategy of, again, managing the so-called quote-unquote Palestinian problem, managing the population, depoliticizing them, and suppressing any resistance and political activity against the occupation. And we did not have enough time, so we briefly talked about the role and legal duty, actually, of third-party states in holding Israel accountable. Unfortunately, we are still in the realm of just having empty condemnations, but no real action on the ground. And I know that many of the questions that we haven't tackled today are actually have to do with the role of third-party states and what can be done to actually have more action on the ground. I am not a legal expert, but I think that law is not the only tool. It is one tool among many more. So this is something we have to remember, and each person has to do something. And so we can focus on different legal, economic, political, diplomatic strategies in parallel in our fight to seek justice for Palestinians. So thank you again, Nada and Issam, and thank you for our audience. I hope this was also insightful and informative. And I hope we meet again a couple of weeks from now. We will have a policy lab on Arab normalization, given the so-called deal that was signed between the UAE, Israel, under the sponsorship of the Trump's administration. Thank you so much. Please keep healthy, safe, and sane in these very difficult circumstances we're all going through. And I will see you in September. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.